Okay, so from where I left off last time, we'd created the four different animations, and there's just a couple more tweaks and things to do, and some kind of useful tips to show you, which might come up. So, first thing I'm going to show you is if you're wanting to create a variety of characters, but you really can't be bothered to recreate the character you've done 3 or 4 times over, in a different way, what you can do is use the hue tool to create a bunch of different combinations. So I'm going to go image, canvas size, and I'm going to extend the canvas twofold vertically. Yeah. So you can see I've got two separate sections. I'm just going to, for the sake of it, have 3 different characters in my game. So I'm going to select all 4 of my characters currently. I'm going to go to the Move tool, and I'm going to hold down Alt, which is going to allow me to click and drag. Now, one thing I haven't mentioned in the previous videos, which you may not have toggled, is the transform controls. If you've not used it before Photoshop, it may be untoggled, by which you'll have this view here. Which is fine, it does exactly the same thing, but sometimes having those transform controls can be useful for things like rotating, which we'll go into in a minute. So yeah, let's put those 2 batches of characters down. But before I do the last one, actually, I'm going to open up Image, Adjustments, Hue, and Saturation. I'm just going to toggle the grid so I can see this properly. The toggle for that, I believe for Windows, is Control, and it's the speech mark button, which might be different on your laptop because I've got a US keyboard. So if I drag the slider here, I can create a variety of different colors for my character. So I can do like a zombie character, ghost character, you know, I don't even know, a Shrek character, I don't even know. And this is great because it means you can create a bunch of varieties for your game. But let's say you don't want to change that base color, you know, the skin color of your character. Let me just create a combination down here. I'm just going to retoggle the grid so I can see where my frames end and start. So, image, adjustments, hue, saturation. The shortcut for that is Control and U. So on here, what I can also do is I can go into what color I want to change. So I'm just going to toggle the background again. So I think yellows might do it. So you can see the skin is remaining the same color, but his chest hair gets changed, but the rest of him stays the same color. So that, for example, if you're wanting 5 or 6 different teams with the same character, that's the way of changing them very quickly. You could also do it with code, but obviously you can't get as selective with, you know, as with what we're doing right now, unless you literally had them having separate pieces of clothing on. You can also tweak the saturation in case you want to go for a gritty post-apocalyptic horror. I don't know. Whatever. Anyway, so that'll do for those 3 characters. 1 bad guy, and then two main players, I guess. Now say that I want to make these characters bigger. Now this, I think I may have already got it set up for it. Yeah, I have. Bear with me. Ah, dear. Okay. Usually if I wanted to scale the characters, I'd go down to image size, and the setting that it would be by default put on would be bicubic automatic. Now what that will do is when you expand it, so let's say I want to make it, you know, let's say twice as big. So by default it'll scale the bottom size as well, which is handy. So if I do that, click OK, look what it does to our image. It, you know, makes it really kind of ugly and blotchy and not great. And you might think, wow, this looks quite nice actually, but the problem with this is that was the problem we had before, which is when we bring it into the game and we apply that transparency to it, what you're going to get is that, which is not good. And I've just realized as well that section of white from earlier was so unnoticeable that actually it's still there. So I'll go back to the image previously and fix that. But you can see that it's leaving this awful kind of blurred effect to the image, which isn't exactly great. So what we need to do when we're expanding this is we need to go to image size, and we need to make sure it's changed from bicubic or bilinear or any of these, because these are all set up for your default Photoshop uses, which is photography. And we need to set it to nearest neighbor, and that'll keep your edges nice and sharp. So if I try this again, everything stays crisp. So one thing I've noticed, which you just saw when I changed the background colors, is this irritating thing is still here. This little kind of artifact, let's say. So what I'm going to do to make sure that there's no other kind of artifacts on the screen is I'm going to kind of go through and essentially green screen the image by setting the background to green. But what I'm also going to do is, because if I want to change all of these, I'm going to have to go through every single one, and that's going to break my spirit and soul. If I go to contiguous up here, I can untick this and it will find all of them in this image. Now, having said that, my tolerance on here is set to 0, so it's only going to match the ones with the same hue. That's why only that top row disappeared. But usually, that gets rid of them all. That is a very, very useful tool. If you're, for example, wanting to change, slightly change, oh wow, slightly change, the color of his coat, his waistcoat, let's say. For all the characters, or you decide that you want to make this guy's face the same as what it was before. It's or if you want it to make all of their faces match and chest hair match. You see, so it's an amazingly useful tool, and it genuinely pains me to see people going through each and every pixel of their image, tweaking it one by one. That is a very quick fix to that. So the other thing that I kind of said I was going to cover, which is in the kind of the same vein as this, is rotation. You may have noticed that all these characters are facing the same way, and you might think, oh well, our characters are only going to be able to run one way. What are we going to do? Don't we need to create the opposite way facing? One of the kind of handy things in Stencilworks is you can, when you've imported your sprites, there's a little cog in the corner of the screen, like a little settings thing for the animations, and you can flip the animations there. Or you can do the even smarter thing and use code to do it. You can just flip the scale of the character. Another thing to do with rotation, I showed you the transform tool before, the move and transform tool. This is another useful tool, by the way. The magic wand tool allows you to kind of select a set area of your screen. So I'm gonna select this arm right here. Now what I'm doing with this is I am I selected the first kind of bulk section of the colour in the image, which was, you know, the biggest section of colour, which was this bit. But then I also held down Shift, and that allowed me to kind of select the rest of it. So I have this arm now. Can you see that this section of the image is now white? That is because the background colour here is white. So if we go to the fill tool, or whatever tool, which allows you to select the eyedropper tool, if we make sure that the background colour is set to green, I want to do that again, it's visible. Once again, it's nothing particularly relevant or important to this, but just good to know. If I want to rotate this image, once again by clicking Show Transform Controls, or go into transform mode, if I try and I have to change this again on the fly. If I want to rotate this image, it might look alright now. I mean, it's still a bit jiggly, which isn't great. But if I rotate that to, let's say, here, and then press enter, oh, that's an exception. If it's on 90 degree snaps, it avoids this from happening. But anything in between, and you get that obnoxious blurring again. So what you're going to want to do is, when you go on transform here, make sure that interpolation is set again to nearest neighbor, and that will allow you to kind of snap in between sections. I mean, it obviously still needs a little bit of neatening up, so you'll go through and you'll kind of fix all these little bobbly bits and blend it into the shoulder or whatever. But it's just useful to know. And obviously, when you're scaling at a smaller size, you won't have as much bobbly stuff. Yeah, so that's and that applies for scaling as well. Rather than using image size, that'll keep it. It won't keep it uniform. You'll have some bits which are slightly larger pixels than these. If you use numbers in a scale of 10, or if you keep the numbers you're using uniform rather than just clicking and dragging. If you change the numbers up here, that'll keep things consistent. But you can see here when I scale it, so he's got a huge arm, it keeps it crisp. So hopefully those are useful. So that's pretty much everything except the final kind of most important part, which is the export. We need to save this out. So the format that we want to save it to, you can have saved it to Photoshop before this point, but you go save as. We need it saving as a PNG. So if you go to your format, it might be different on Windows, but it's more or less the same area. If you drop it down to PNG down here, then just call it Mr. Big Arms. I don't know, whatever. Maybe a good idea is if it's, if you wanted to keep things in good file structure, name them stuff relevant to what you want. So players is a good example. And yeah, just click save, and this bit is alright. I mean, I've never really nosied into it enough to know what it means. I can have a look into it. I usually leave it as what it is. I think it's more just making sure I think it can compress the image and make it run a little bit quicker. But I'll have a look into it, and I'll leave a message or something like that. Anyone has any questions, I'll answer it in class. And yeah, that should now be good to use in your game. You've got your green, which will be the transparent color, which will be removed, and your characters are all in their own defined grid spaces. So when we split up this image, there's not going to be any dismembered limbs from our characters. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything. If there's anything else that comes up that I think of, I'll either do an extra video or just put some extra notes to supplement this. Hopefully that's been useful. Once again, if you have any questions, just let me know in class. And yeah, have a good one.